Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer, and guess what? For this video, we're going to be covering my top 10 overpowered builds in Elden Ring. This is going to be an insane video filled with a lot of powerful builds that can make the game significantly easier. This video is also spoiler-free. We're going to be covering all of the best weapon spells, etc. in Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. These are extremely strong. They do a lot of damage, and honestly, you're going to have a lot of fun in the process too. After about 8 to 10 hours of testing the Thorns sorcery Impenetrable Thorns, I'm going to go over that one too, and all of the information I have on that one after testing it. It is extremely strong, no question about it. It does a lot of bleed buildup and a lot of damage. And of course, we're going to be covering the fantastic bonk stick too that is very broken. People in the community have now declared it the chicken leg, but whether it's a chicken leg or Bloodfiend's arm, it is an incredible weapon, truly. And we're going to be covering some other great ones too, like this one that can continuously go for massive physical damage, excessive attack power. This is my top 10 overpowered builds. At number 10, we have Spear of the Impaler. This is the weapon that you get from Messmer's Remembrance, one of the bosses in the DLC. Not too many spoilers there since he made many of the trailers for the game. And the spear itself is actually incredible. You can throw the charged attacks, which is really cool, and the Ash of War is amazing. I recommend picking this one for sure, especially if you want to run a Dexterity Faith build. Speaking of Dexterity and Faith builds, by the way, there is a video for them in the description below. I did 6 builds yesterday, all with the same stats, all Dexterity and Faith. This weapon is fun as hell by definition. It truly is. You will have an absolute blast with this one. This Ash of War Messmer's Assault will actually scale split between your Faith and Dexterity stat, much like on the weapon. The fire damage itself is going to scale with your Faith stat. The physical component is going to scale with Dexterity, so it's best if you want to make use of the powerful Ash of War to split between the two. Now, it does have some downsides, and that's why I'm going to put it a little bit lower on this list. And the reason it has a few downsides is it is a very long Ash of War. It doesn't have infinite hyper armor, and certain larger targets, like you see here trying to hit the dragon's leg, can be a little bit difficult to pull off the entire Ash of War. So at times, yeah, there's a little bit of a difficult part in trying to get this entire Ash of War off, but when you do, it does a lot of damage. I've stacked it up on several different bosses where I've gotten between 4 and 6 up to 7,000 damage with the Ash of War, which is pretty incredible just using 2 buffs and a tier. Definitely overpowered if you can get used to the skill. Just takes a minute to get used to, no question about it, but I have no doubt in mind you will love this weapon if you end up trying this out, especially now that Dexterity and Faith is a lot better. The DLC added a lot of options. If you run a nice split Dexterity Faith build, you'll have a ton of versatile options with the new weapons in the DLC. In a second here, we're going to go over our Rune level 150 stats, equipment, everything you need to know. We have Spear of the Impaler, plus 10 preferably. We're using any seal here. We're just using it for buffs. We hit 51 poise. We have the Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm for fire damage, Shard of Alexander for the weapon art, Millicent's Prosthesis. It can build up on successive hits, Flame Tier for fire damage, and Faith Tier. And we're going to jump into stats on this one. And of course, as I mentioned before, the split is really important here. We hit that initial good soft cap of 45 Dexterity. We hit 60 Faith with the Faith Tier, so we have a nice split for the fire and physical damage. We have 60 Vigor, of course, 21 Mind, 25 Endurance, and for our buffs, we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And for the next one here at number 9, we have the Barbed Staff Spear, one of my favorite new weapons that was added in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC for Elden Ring. It's an incredible weapon that does a lot of holy damage and fires extremely fast. I mean, look at this projectile. You could basically spam holy damage. This actually helped me with the final boss of the DLC. I was able to do a significant amount of damage on the final boss, by the way. This is epic in every way. The Ash of War is great. It has amazing Faith scaling, by the way. All of this holy damage is going to scale with your Faith stat, directly with your Faith stat. That's the case with a lot of elemental damages as far as elemental damage goes. In this case, the holy damage is all your Faith stat. The physical component on the weapon scales a little bit with strength and dexterity. Believe it or not, these first two here, Messmer's Spear, Spear of the Impaler, as well as the Barbed Staff Spear, are 2 of my favorite weapons. As somebody who loves Faith builds, and especially now that Dexterity and Faith is becoming better, these 2 are excellent. I recommend them. They're a lot of fun to use too. Seriously, pick up these 2 in the DLC. Honestly, you will not regret it. They're amazing. I mean, look at that. That's a good amount of holy damage right there. We have the Barbed Staff Spear plus 10. We're using any seal just for buffs. You could use the Erdtree seal. It would fit this build. We're using the Black Knight set here. Here, the Ritual Swords Talisman for generic damage. Sacred Scorpion Shard for holy damage. Shard of Alexander for the weapon art. I added Blade of Mercy, Holy Tier for the holy damage, and Faith Tier. And now for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, we have 80 Faith. We're all the way up to 80 Faith because that Ash of War is going to cap around 60, but between 60 and 80 you'll get some additional damage, of course, because it has really good Faith scaling on this weapon, and you'll be able to throw in incantations too. We're using Golden Vow, Hellish Rebury, 22 Mind, 25 Endurance. This is a highly recommended build, and I love this weapon. At number 8, we have the Sword Lance with Spinning Gravity Thrust, a powerful combination on a very good new weapon that the DLC has given us. So recently, earlier in the week, I did a build for this in Frost. It was really good in Frost as a Strength and Intelligence build. I'm using it as a Strength and Arcane build here, though, for bleed build-up, and it's really good for that. It can build up on successive hits as well, and you can get massive damage from this weapon art. On a quick side note here, if you have not subbed to this channel and you want amazing, awesome Elden Ring builds and a great community, be sure to hit that sub button. You are not going to want to miss out on the content coming up. We've got a lot more builds that are coming out that are going to be awesome. Can't wait for those. And now back to this build at hand. We're able to get a lot of bleed build up there and take down Radahn. This is a powerful combination. Works really well on a Frost build too. I did that earlier in the week. That is also a great combination as well if you want to go Strength and Intelligence. Let's jump into equipment, stats, everything you need to know. And of course, we have the Sword Lance with Spinning Gravity Thrust. We have it in Blood Affinity. Any seal for buffs. We're using the White Mask. We hit 51 poise. Millicent's Prosthesis for successive attacks. Shard of Alexander for the weapon art. Lord of Blood's Exaltation for bleed. We have the Winged Sword Insignia or Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and Thorny Tier for successive attack damage and Faith Tier for buffs. And our stats are in this one. We are a Strength and Arcane build. We have 60 Vigor. We have 40 Strength. That's going to give us 60 Strength when we're two-handing this. 45 Arcane for the soft cap on bleed build-up. Golden Vow, Flame Grip, Strength. And at number 7, we have the amazing and heavily underrated Anvil Hammer. This weapon hits like an absolute truck. It's amazing how much damage you can get from this. The posture damage and the fact that it's a great Strength and Faith weapon. This easily makes the number 7 spot absolutely in my top 10. This is a beast of a weapon where you're going to get a lot of damage, by the way, out of putting your investment points into Strength. First, I would go with your Strength stat, of course, for the physical damage on the weapon, because that's the main part of it. But if you can expend some points in Faith too, you can add on to the fire damage and get even more AR. My recommendation here is to go with charge attacks, jump attacks, whatever you want to do with this weapon. You're going to get posture breaks, you're going to get massive physical damage and some fire damage as well. This is truly a phenomenal weapon. Check this one out for sure, especially if you like Strength and Faith builds. Alright, and then the Ash of War there is Smithing Art Spears. That does a lot of posture damage too. I like the charge hits though on this. We have the Anvil Hammer, preferably +10. We're using the Erdtree seal here. We have the Black Knight set on. We have the two-handed sword talisman for obvious reasons, Fire Scorpion Charm for the little bit of fire damage, Shard of Alexander for the weapon art, Axe Talisman, and then you could use the charge tier as well, which is great with this, or the flame tier, that one's up to you, and faith tier. For stats on this one, we're very much a strength and faith build. We have 60 strength when we're two-handing this, and then we have 50 faith once we're using the faith tier. We have 60 vigor, 20 mind, 33 endurance. You're going to need a decent amount of endurance for this one, and then we're using Golden Vow and Hellish Rebury. The next one up here at number 6, we have the Dancing Blade of Ranah. This is an amazing weapon where you could just hold down the Ash of War button, and yeah, you could be knocked out of this. It's not going to have infinite hyper armor or anything like that, but you can keep going and build up damage. Look right there, we got 13,000 damage on the Ash of War. This also gets an A in dexterity scaling. I did a build for these about a week ago, and honestly, I've loved them since. They're great for the new two-handed swords that we can get, where you basically get 2 swords for a very light weight, and with these, you can build up a lot of damage, hold down the button. It doesn't even cost that much FP either. Let's jump into equipment. Alright, for equipment on this one, we have Dancing Blade of Ranah +10. We have any seal for buffs. We're using the Black Knight armor set again. I think part of the Oath Keepers too. Ritual Swords Talisman, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia or Winged Sword Insignia. Shard of Alexander for the weapon art. Millicent's Prosthesis also for the successive attacks. Thorny tier for the same reason, faith tier for buffs, and then we have 60 vigor, we have 75 dexterity with this build. You want to invest heavily in dexterity when you have a weapon scaling with an A, 23 mind, 28 endurance. Endurance is a good investment here as well, Golden Vow, and Flame Grant Me Strength. And at number 5, we have the Claws of Night. These are an awesome weapon that have a really cool Ash of War that you could build up on bleed and do a lot of physical damage, a little bit of magic damage as well too. It scales entirely with dexterity despite the magic damage, but the damage you can get from the weapon as a whole between the weapon itself, building up on successive hits, and then the Ash of War is phenomenal. The combination can give you very, very high DPS. I think among the entire class of claws, they are one of the highest DPS for any of the weapons in the class. They truly are ridiculous. And then you have a ranged attack that does bleed too on top of everything else, which makes them really overpowered. The only thing I don't like is I wish it wasn't a somber weapon, and instead we could change the affinity, because obviously we would put these in blood affinity. I mean, they'd be best in blood affinity, no question about it, but still, we're able to get a good amount of damage on them on the Knight's Cavalry here. You can continue to use this Ash of War, by the way. It doesn't cost that much FP either, and then get up close for some really high physical damage DPS and a little bit of magic damage too. And soon we're going to be going over equipment stats, everything you need to know for this fantastic build, and we're going to talk about the claws now. Claws of Night plus 10. We have any seal for buffs. We hit 51 poise, got a cool armor set on. Shard of Alexander for that weapon art, Lord of Blood's Exaltation for bleed build-up, Melissa's Prosthesis for more dexterity, Ritual Sword's Talisman for generic damage, Thorny Tier for our fast hits, and Faith Tier for buffs. And for our stats, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, we have 15 Strength, we have 80 Dexterity with this build because it has really good dexterity scaling. Despite the magic damage, it's all dexterity, 25 Faith, Golden Vow, Flame Grip, and Strength. And at number 4, we have the Fire Knight's Greatsword, one of my personal favorite weapons because it's an excellent faith weapon and does a lot of fire damage. It has great scaling in Flame Art. It's becoming a really popular weapon, and for good reason. So out of the 2 cool new Ashes of War that we have that add fire damage, which is huge with the Fire Knight's Greatsword, you want that additional fire damage. I actually like Flame Spear better, despite the fact that a lot of other people think the other one's better. I enjoy Flame Spear, and it's chargeable too. Yeah, Flame Skewer is the other one that you have an option to use, which basically does the same thing. It's going to also coat your weapon in fire, and then additional fire damage will give you around 950 AR or so with this setup. But for me, I like the chargeable one that also does a lot of poise damage. Plus, it looks really cool too. Charging this up is absolutely awesome. This has got to be one of my favorite Ashes of War in the game in terms of how simple it is, yet how cool it looks, and then the additional fire damage having between 950 and 1000 AR is truly incredible. And sure, I get a little bit beat up here with these twin gargoyles because this fight is always challenging. This is on New Game Plus, by the way, for all of the footage in this video, Journey 2. I'm actually moving 2 of my 3 characters back into the DLC on New Game Plus Journey 2, and then I'm going to go from there, hopefully eventually getting back to New Game Plus 7 scaling. Because as far as Elden Ring goes and Shadow of the Erdtree, I enjoy the challenge of New Game Plus 7 at rune level 150, although maybe the meta will go up. Maybe I'll do some high-level builds soon, too. I know a lot of people are looking for those. We have the Fire Knight's Flame Art Greatsword with Flame Spear. Any seal for buffs, hit 51 poise. Shard of Alexander for the weapon art. Godfrey Icon is chargeable. Fire Scorpion Charm for fire damage. Ritual Sword Talisman for generic damage. Flame Tier for fire damage. And Faith Tier 2. And for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 28 Endurance, we have 22 Strength, 20 Dexterity, we have 70 Faith with the Faith tier, and then for our buffs here, we're going to be using Golden Vow and Flame Grip and Strength. And at number 3, we have the weapon that carried me through a run on DLC. Honestly, I love these. Number 3 is the Backhand Blades, and we have them in Blood Affinity, of course, and I wanted to show off the skill there, by the way. You could actually use it to dodge attacks and then even follow up with a hit, which is incredibly useful, by the way. Right there is exactly what we did. A truly amazing weapon art in Blind Spot. I really love this, honestly, as somebody like myself who's not the best at dodging, always having that extra dodge window, that little bit of a dodge difference between rolling and then using that depending on the position you are with the boss, it's incredibly helpful. Now, I do end up getting hit here and I get a little bit greedy. That happens too, but this Ash of War is incredibly helpful. And of course, in Blood Affinity, we're getting around 107 bleed build up. Not bad at all. We have 45 Dexterity and 45 Arcane. Decent AR too at around 400 and something. With the weapons, the fact that they weigh basically nothing, it's really incredible the amount of damage you can get. Good physical damage, good bleed build up, and the ability to consistently dodge attacks. These, in my opinion, are an absolute winner. Let's jump into equipment and stats here in a second. Alright, after I rest, of course, because I had the rot build up there, we're going to jump into equipment now, and we have the Blood Backhand Blades with Blind Spot, of course, any seal for buffs. White Mask, we hit 51 poise here. And then we have Lord of Blood's Exaltation for bleed build up, Wing Sword Insignia for successive attacks, Shard of Alexander for the weapon art, Melissa's Prosthesis for dexterity and successive attacks, Thorny Tier, same reason, and Faith Tier for buffs. And we have 60 Vigor, 19 Mind, 26 Endurance, 15 Strength. We have 45 Dexterity with Melissa's Prosthesis, 15 Faith, that's got to be 25 Faith with the Faith tier. We have 45 Arcane, which is the first soft cap you want to hit for bleed build up. And the buffs I was using was Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. If you have a hard time dodging, these weapons are absolutely for you. And if you're looking for a good bleed build, I recommend this one. The Backhand blades are truly awesome. At number 2, we have Impenetrable Thorns. This is a really incredible build, by the way. I took about 10 hours this week trying to figure this one out. It was a little bit complicated to figure out at first. However, I'm going to go over it in detail. First things first, I didn't even realize that you could spam this. I was using it very slowly initially, but we're going to talk about how Impenetrable Thorn works and how much damage you can get out of it. So basically, this does a ton of bleed buildup based on your arcane stat. I figured out after trying it on high intelligence, a mix between intelligence and arcane, and then going for high arcane, that high arcane is the best way to go. This isn't pure magic damage or anything like that. The bleed buildup is all based off your arcane stat, which means that the damage from the actual spell itself is pretty much going to pull from arcane. So eventually I got to around 70 arcane with 50 vigor, and then using its here to kind of up my vigor a little bit so it's closer to 60. I figured out, by the way, as far as the damage itself, it's really not that great outside of the bleed build-up. This is why this is in the number 2 spot, not in the number 1. It also has RNG, and unless you're really close to a boss, it has a tendency to miss as well. And as far as staffs go, by the way, this is actually a lot better for bigger targets is what I was trying to say there than smaller ones. If they're agile, they can definitely dodge this easily. You're going to need one of the 2 staffs that scales with arcane. There's only 2 of them. I used the Alberneric one, and you're going to need that because it's going to increase your bleed build-up. Everything based off this spell is based off your arcane stat. I know it's a lot of information, but I did a lot of testing with this one. We have the Alberneric Staff plus 25, any seal for buffs, hit 51 poise. We have the Graven Mask Talisman, Outer God Heirloom, Beloved Stardust. We have the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Crimson Burst Crystal tier, and Faith tier 2. Yeah, it took me a second to realize how quickly you could chain cast it with that extra talisman, Beloved Stardust, that new one. As far as this goes, I thought I had 75 arcane, but apparently I have 85 with the Outer God Heirloom. But yeah, it's all based off arcane, and you need 24 Faith to use the spell. Impenetrable Thorns, Golden Vow, and Blessing's Boon. A lot of information for that one, but basically it's all based off your arcane stat. Now, Bloodfiend's Arm, speaking of which, is also arcane. This is the most powerful strength and arcane weapon in the DLC, and for me, it's the number 1 weapon in the DLC. It's incredible. Even after the nerf, it's ridiculous. There's no RNG to it, and it does ridiculous posture damage too. The definition of an insane weapon. This is consistent and overpowered. I've now used this against several of the bosses in the DLC. I kept this one spoiler free, and several of the base game bosses, including many of the late game bosses, and there is nothing better in terms of the DLC Shadow of the Erdtree for me than Bloodfiend's Arm. This is no question my number 1 build. I mean, even after the nerf that it got, the bleed build up on it is still so good. The charge attack does extra bleed damage, still does, by the way. It wasn't nerfed completely or anything like that. It does immense posture damage, as you can see. You're going to see that over and over again, and it just hits like a truck. This is ridiculous. It's in the definition of a bonk stick, the best strength weapon in the game, and definitely the best strength and arcane weapon in the game, too. This is New Game Plus, by the way, and the Draconic Tree Sentinel goes down in just 4 hits, and he has some pretty decent resistances too, but it does not matter. If you're wielding Bloodfiend's Arm, you're going to be able to crush whatever boss you run across. This is an amazing weapon and is my number 1 for sure. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have Bloodfiend's Arm plus 25. We are using the Shriek of Sorrow, I believe it's called, that new Ash of War that does additional damage. White Mask, any seal for buffs. Ritual Sword Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Axe Talisman for those charge hits. Arsenal Charm plus 1, Spike Crack tier for the charge hits, and Faith tier for buffs. And we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 25 Endurance. We have 40 Strength. That's going to be 60 when we're two-handing this. And then we have 45 Arcane. Of course, 25 Faith with the Faith tier. That'll get us to about rune level 160, by the way, if you do the math on this build. And then for our buffs, using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. So I want to show you one more thing to show you how broken this weapon truly is. Without changing our stats, still strength and arcane, we're going to go for cold affinity. We're not going to change any talismans I'm going to show at the end after this fight, and we're going to show off how well this does without changing anything. I mean, literally, we're still a strength and arcane build. Now, we will have 60 strength when we're two-handing this, but no investment in intelligence whatsoever, and we can still beat down the Black Knife Assassin here. Of course, I think is immune to bleed. I think she's immune to bleed, but yeah, wow. Got a Frost proc in there, a lot of damage, a posture break. It's insane. Check this out. We didn't change our stats at all. We didn't change our equipment at all. We kept the same exact thing, threw on Chilling Mist, and it's still absolutely slapped. It's crazy. Thanks for watching this one. I'm glad everybody tuned in for this one. I know you guys like the overpowered stuff a lot. Of course, we're going to be doing some fun builds coming up and stuff too. Be sure to sub if you haven't subbed yet. If you haven't checked out my Dexterity and Faith builds, be sure to check that out too. It's in the description below. I can't wait to do more build videos. Looking forward to this. Shadow of the Erdtree has been an amazing DLC that has actually exceeded our expectations. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.